have a male on the line saying he wants to die and that he killed someone. He doesn't know who he has killed, but that it occurred at that address.
My suspect wants us to shoot him. Blood on the floor, looks unconscious, not moving.
What seemed like a normal date would turn into a horrifying nightmare when 25-year-old Ashlin Black was brutally murdered by a man she'd met on Tinder. Ashlin had no reason to suspect anything was off. Ethan came across as polite and charming, the kind of guy anyone would feel safe with. But as soon as they stepped into his house, everything changed. At that moment, Ashlin realized the man that she thought was harmless was actually a cold, calculated predator.
At one point, he woke up and, for some unknown reason, completely unprovoked, he decided that he was going to kill this young woman, and he did.
And the most chilling part, Ashlin wasn't even his first intended victim.
I did get a weird vibe, and I think that's kind of what stopped me from ever hanging out with him.
The details in this case are both chilling and heartbreaking, and will leave you wondering just how many predators we unknowingly cross paths with every single day. But to understand how everything happened, we need to start at the beginning. Ashlin Black was a fun, outgoing, and free-spirited 25-year-old who loved camping, thrifting vintage clothes, and rocking out to Nirvana. She lived in Layton, Utah, and worked as a carer, helping children with special needs. Her family said Ashlin had a natural talent for standing up for those who couldn't always speak for themselves. She truly loved her job and the difference she made in these kids' lives. Ashlin dreamed of being a mom someday and was especially passionate about adopting a child with Down syndrome. It was something she felt deeply connected to. People who knew Ashlin only had great things to say about her. Former co-workers from her time working at a restaurant in Salt Lake City described her as kind, welcoming, and full of life. Her infectious laugh lit up any room and made everyone feel instantly at ease. Like many others, Ashlin was just looking for someone she could connect with, someone who shared her interests and made her feel special. That's how on the evening of May 23rd, 2020, she found herself scrolling through Tinder. And it didn't take long before she matched with 24-year-old Ethan Hunsaker. He was a single dad, recently separated from his wife, and living alone in a rental nearby. Ethan came across as a sweet and charming guy, and the two hit it off right away. They even decided to meet up that same night for dinner and drinks. Around 9 p.m., Ethan picked Ashlin up from her house, and the two headed to a local bar. They spent hours chatting and getting to know each other and really seemed to connect. After about 4 hours, Ethan suggested they head back to his place. Normally, Ashlin might have turned down an invitation like that, but Ethan seemed genuine and she felt like she could trust him. Sadly, Ashlin's trust was misplaced. Ethan was not who he appeared to be, and what happened next was unimaginably tragic.
We have a male on the line saying he wants to die and that he killed someone. He doesn't know who he has killed, but that it occurred at that address.
My suspect wants us to shoot him. Blood on the floor, looks unconscious, not moving.
At around 3:20 a.m., the Layton Police Department received a chilling 911 call from a man claiming he had taken someone's life. The man was none other than Ethan Hunsaker. On the call, Ethan admitted that he had just met Ashlin and didn't know her last name. Then he made a shocking request, asking the officers to take him out when they got there. When the police arrived at the house on North Reed Avenue, they found a horrifying scene. Ashlin was lying face down on a red-soaked floor in one of the bedrooms, her body covered in knife wounds and marks. Paramedics worked desperately to save her, but tragically it was too late. Ashlin was pronounced dead at the scene. The officers quickly noticed scratches and injuries on Ethan, which made it obvious he was responsible. But they didn't even have to press him. Ethan confessed to everything without hesitation.
Begin tonight with news of a 25-year-old to death while on a Tinder date.
Ethan's confession to the police painted a chilling and deeply disturbing picture of what happened. After he and Ashlin got back to his place from their date, they were intimate in one of the bedrooms and eventually fell asleep on the floor. But when Ethan woke up with Ashlin asleep on his arm, something snapped in his twisted mind and he decided to end her life. Without warning, he wrapped his hands around her neck, squeezing as hard as he could for a full minute. Ashlin woke up in a panic, desperately trying to fight back. But Ethan was bigger and stronger, and she couldn't escape. And yet the horror didn't stop there. As Ashlin lay barely conscious on the floor, Ethan walked to the kitchen, grabbed a pocket knife that had a 4-inch blade, and came back He unleashed a brutal attack, jabbing her 5 to 10 times in her chest, sides, and back in a cold, calculated frenzy. But what's even more horrifying is what happened next. Ethan didn't immediately call for help. Instead, he waited 10 agonizing minutes while Ashlin lay bleeding out on the floor. It was as though he wanted to ensure she was gone before finally dialing 911.
Neighbors of 24-year-old Ethan Hunsaker react to what Layton City Police say he did early Sunday morning inside this home on 1319 North Reed Avenue.
Super scary. I mean, you kind of hear about these things, but they're not necessarily 3 houses down from you.
I waved at him a couple times mowing his lawn, and he seemed like an all right guy. I never talked to him.
But even with Ethan's confession, police were struggling to understand how things took such a dark turn. By his own account, the date had gone well. They got along, and there were no arguments or fights that could have triggered him to commit the vicious crime. The violence seemed to come from nowhere. One minute they were sleeping, and the next, Ashlin was gone. It just didn't make any sense. Then Ethan dropped a bombshell that shocked even the most experienced investigators. He confessed that when he picked Ashlin up that night, he already knew he was going to end her life. Inviting her over to his place wasn't about making a connection, it was a setup for murder. What made it even more unsettling was how calm and emotionless he seemed as he described it.
But certainly, by his own admission, had some demons that he was dealing with.
Investigators say the 24-year-old man stabbed Ashlin Black to death with a pocket knife after spending the evening on a date. The two met through the popular dating app Tinder.
The motive behind the homicide is under further investigation. However, the attack appears to have been unprovoked.
The news of Ashlin's murder sent shockwaves through the community, exposing the chilling risks of online dating, especially for women. But what made this nightmare even darker was the flood of victim blaming that followed. Instead of condemning Ethan's actions, people on social media turned their attention to Ashlin, claiming she should have known better than to go to his house on the first date. It's a cruel and unsettling response, and let me be clear, this isn't about what Ashlin did or didn't do. We have seen countless tragedies where victims are betrayed by those they trust most. Spouses, family, lifelong friends. The real issue is not the actions of the victims, but the sick and violent predators. Jen Oxborough, the then executive director of the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition, didn't mince words. She said the victim blaming needs to stop. Even if someone is engaging in behavior you wouldn't, it doesn't mean that gives anyone the right to hurt them. Oxborough also urged people to prioritize safety when meeting someone new, especially through dating apps. She emphasized the importance of precaution. Let someone know your plans, where you're going, who you're meeting, and when you'll check in.
And if somebody is intent on doing harm, they'll, you can't always protect yourself from that.
Meanwhile, Ashlin's heartbroken family and friends were struggling to make sense of how anyone could do something so horrible to her. Ashley was always kind and thoughtful and made everyone feel like they mattered. It just didn't add up that someone would intentionally want to hurt her. Her parents shared a gut-wrenching statement saying, "A monster has taken away the life of our little girl in a crime as senseless as it was evil. Our hearts are broken and our lives are forever changed due to the despicable acts of another person. In just a few senseless and selfish minutes, a life of an amazing, fun-loving young woman was taken, one who had a passion for being the voice of those who could not speak out for themselves, and a gift for working with those who have special needs. The lives of her family and friends are permanently altered. No time can fill the emptiness we feel and the hole it has left in our hearts." Now, many who knew Ethan were shocked when they heard what he was being accused of, but others, not so much. Ethan had worked for a concrete company for a short while, and his manager said that he was a great employee with an outgoing personality that the clients really liked. However, things took a dark turn in 2019 after he broke up with the mother of his young daughter. Coworkers noticed he wasn't the same anymore. He seemed sad and withdrawn, and his work started to go downhill. He started coming in late or sometimes not at all. A few months later, he got fired after an incident with a female coworker. The exact details of what happened were not revealed, but some of his former colleagues said Ethan had made some really disturbing comments. He allegedly talked about wanting to kidnap and hurt women, an unsettling sign of the darkness that was brewing inside of him. His former boss said he was the kind of goofy young kid that always made us laugh, I guess, that always had something stupid to say. Then, end of last year, it was just weird. He went from goofy to just nobody wanted to be around him. The boss also admitted that he wasn't surprised when he heard what Ethan was accused of. Another disturbing account came from a former coworker named Autumn Daly, who shared her own unsettling experience with Ethan. Autumn said that he had bombarded her with messages and tried to meet up with her multiple times in the weeks leading up to Ashlin's murder. The two had met at an old job and had known each other for about 11 years. In the beginning, everything was friendly. They'd hang out on lunch breaks and chat casually, but Autumn was clear that she wasn't romantically interested in him and had never given him any reason to think otherwise. In 2019, however, Ethan started asking her out. Autumn tried to let him down gently, coming up with excuses, but when he wouldn't back off, she began ignoring him completely. He didn't stop. Ethan found other ways to message her through different platforms. The last message Autumn received from him was just days before he murdered Ashlin, leaving Autumn with the chilling thought that she might have been his original target.
I did get a weird vibe, and I think that's kind of what stopped me from ever hanging out with him. Just can't take no for an answer. I feel lucky and blessed, like someone was out looking out for me, but I also feel for her family and for her.
Despite having confessed, Ethan initially pleaded not guilty to Ashlin's murder. However, in June 2021, just over 1 year later after the prosecution refused to give him a plea, he changed his plea to guilty, but mentally unwell. Ashlin's family said that they were relieved by the change of plea because they wouldn't have to go through a trial, which can be both mentally and emotionally draining. Ethan's lawyers requested that his mental health be taken into consideration upon his sentencing. Several doctors conducted evaluations, and Ethan was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, recurring psychotic features, generalized anxiety disorder, and severe alcohol use disorder. The judge ruled that Ethan's mental health at the time of Ashlin's murder wasn't a factor in his case, but agreed to consider his current condition during sentencing. This gave the judge a few options: send Ethan straight to prison, commit him to the state hospital for 18 months before transferring him to prison, or commit him to the hospital indefinitely for treatment.
That document also reads, Ethan Hunsaker has several mental health issues. Ethan has daily suicidal and homicidal ideations. Ethan has recently thought of ways to kill and kidnap others. Ms. Black apparently had no idea of his mental illness when she connected with Hunsaker on the dating app Tinder, then spent about 4 hours with him before her death.
In February 2022, the judge sentenced Ethan to 15 years to life in prison for Ashlin's murder. However, before serving his time in Utah State Prison, he would be committed to the Utah State Hospital for up to 18 months, or until his mental health was stabilized. After delivering the sentence, the judge spoke directly to Ethan. He said he hoped Ethan would get the help he needed, but made it clear that wasn't the main reason for the treatment. The judge was actually worried Ethan might harm other inmates or prison staff if sent to prison without being stabilized first. Ashlin's parents were heartbroken by the court's decision. They felt the system cared more about Ethan's well-being than their family's pain and loss. The judge apologized for this, saying his hands were tied, but it didn't make the outcome any less devastating. Prosecutors noted that Ethan showed no remorse for his actions, which only deepened the family's frustration. During the sentencing, Ashlin's loved ones gave gut-wrenching statements about how her death had forever changed their lives. Her mom, Jamie, said she can't stop imagining her daughter's final moments. She believes Ethan preyed on Ashlin's kindness and compassion, planning her murder in advance. Ashlin's sister, Avery, described the moment she found out her sister was gone. It felt like the earth had opened up and I fell into it. That night, their family was only told that Ashlin's death had been violent. The full details of what happened came later through a news article. Avery said she now lives with paralyzing anxiety and is afraid to go outside at night and terrified to date. She added, "There will never be justice. for my sister. Ashlin's dad, Sean, shared a bittersweet memory of his daughter always running late. I would give anything to be waiting for her because it would mean I'd get to see her again. After the sentencing, the family's lawyer explained how much this moment meant to them, despite the pain. Nothing is going to bring Ashlin back. Nothing can restore her family's lives to what they were before she was taken from them, and they'll never be the same. But the fact that they've moved past this sentencing phase and were able to either say their piece in court or be present and show their support for Ashlin and each other, that, I think, was a big moment for them. What happened to Ashlin is absolutely devastating. She was just a young woman trying to find someone to connect with. But instead of love, she found herself face to face with a monster, and it cost her everything in the most brutal and unimaginable way. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think 15 years is enough for Ethan after what he did? Share your opinions in the comments down below. And if you found this case unsettling, just wait for the next one. It'll leave you absolutely shaken. Can you imagine going to another town for a friend's wedding and meeting your end at the hands of a psychopathic Tinder date? Many people have had casual encounters via dating apps, but only very rarely do they end so dramatically. Warriena Wright's case is a truly tragic one. She was a young girl with her whole life ahead of her, who had no idea who she would meet in Australia's town, Surfer's Paradise. Trigger warning, we will be discussing some mature themes and adult content. This is your chance to turn away, as this case is about to get as upsetting and outrageous as it can get. But if you're ready for it, let's dive in. Warriena Wright was born in the Philippines to Beth and Warren. Beth was a Seventh-day Adventist church deacon, and Warren was an engineer and a painter. After having 2 daughters, they moved to a tiny town called Porirua, north of Wellington, New Zealand. Warriena grew up with her younger sister, Marieza, who she called Reza. The two were as close as twins. Over time, they became increasingly distant from their parents, and as soon as they could, they moved together in a small Wellington flat and got a cat. Reza was especially estranged from Warren, even saying she doesn't have a dad in one of her tweets. Happy Father's Day, Dad, LOL, JK, I don't have a dad. During college, Warriena became an advocate for animal rights. In 2013, she wrote a submission to the New Zealand Parliament asking for animal testing to be outlawed. She was compassionate and intelligent, according to her friends and family. And her biggest passions, apart from animals, were gaming, anime, and photography. In August 2014, Warriena left New Zealand to attend a friend's wedding in the Gold Coast in Australia. She would be gone for 2 weeks, the longest time the sisters had ever spent apart. It had always been the two of us together. She used to say to me, Reza, we'll always be together. It will always be us and 30 dogs. The last thing Warriena told Reza was, I love you, as they were hanging up the phone on the day Warriena flew out. That was the last time Reza heard her sister's voice. Warriena arrived in Surfer's Paradise to attend her friend Haley's wedding. She'd met Haley at her first job as a photographer, and they'd kept in touch over the years. Now that she was in Australia, Warriena was keeping in touch with Reza, asking for photos of their cat. By August 6th, the wedding was over, but Warriena hadn't had such a long holiday in a very long time, and she wanted to explore the Gold Coast a bit longer before she headed back home. On August 7th, 2014, Warriena went to the Dream World theme park. Then she went shopping and sightseeing throughout the town with her childhood friend Savannah. The same day, she matched with someone on Tinder, 28-year-old Gable Tosti. But there was something she didn't know about Gable. She has no idea he's slept with more than 180 women in the past 4 years, keeping a log of names and dates of each encounter, and that his personality problems are so severe that a psychiatrist once described him as partially disabled. But Gable refuses to think that figure is uncommon.
You know, in this day and age, I'm not sure they're really that uncommon among a lot of guys.
What do you think, a lot of guys?
A lot of single guys. Yeah, it's not really a surprising figure.
Gable would not only go for a record, but he recorded his 50th and 100th women and posted about reaching these numbers on a forum. Ask a guy who just reached 100 girls slept with and is kind of depressed anything. He went on to explain how the 100th date was a big drop in his standards, but he wanted to get the 100th out of the way. He added that she at least had huge teddies, and that he generally doesn't touch anything below a 7 out of 10. When someone on the forum replied to him that guys who sleep with such big numbers of women are usually insecure and often narcissistic, Gable replied that he's trying to improve his confidence as he has never really had friends as a kid. Okay, well, what about recording every single date he's been on? Is that common too?
Obviously, I used to go out quite a lot drinking. I don't have the best memory when I drink. And in this day and age, hitting record is, recording your night out is as easy as pressing a button and leaving your phone in your pocket.
Sure, but why? Anyway, back to August 7th, 2014. Gable immediately started making naughty comments to Warriena on Tinder, but she seemed to indulge in the conversation. Soon they decided to meet on Cavill Avenue, a busy street in the Gold Coast Center, filled with places to get a drink. At 8:48 p.m., Warriena and Gable entered the Surfer's Paradise Tavern Beer Garden, but 3 minutes later, they left the tavern. They decided to go to a supermarket and get some drinks to take to Gable's place instead. Gable lived in an airy apartment in a tall, shiny block, close to the beach as well as the city center. By the way, if you think Gable had a high-paying job to afford that place, think again. Gable was a carpet fitter with a history of scams and a severe alcohol addiction. He started drinking to dangerous levels as a teen, and in 2005 he was arrested for organizing a huge forgery scam. He and his 2 friends created fake IDs for underage kids, earning some $30,000 in the process. He also printed fake money, and yet he wasn't convicted for any of this. In 2011, he was also caught with a DUI. So he was fined and his driver's license got suspended for 10 months. Then in July 2014, just 2 weeks before he met Warriena, police caught Gable driving a Ford Falcon without a license plate, way over the speed limit. Instead of stopping, Gable continued speeding up, reaching 130 miles per hour as the police threw spikes at him to try and blow his wheels. Finally, Gable was caught, and he was 4 times above the drink drive limit. In January 2014, Gable got into a fight with the police again, and this was their exchange. All this is being recorded. Recorded, is it? God, you're a dickhead. What are you arresting me for? For being a dickhead? And Gable wasn't just stopped by the police a few times. He was also banned from several nightclubs as he was described as creepy. So drinking was Gable's best friend. Unfortunately, Warriena liked drinking too. Soon after the two got to Gable's place on August 7th, the drinking game started. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Gable recorded their whole night together.
Do you want me to walk you back home or? No, come on, no, don't be like that.
Just have a good day.
So everything's going okay at this stage? And you've offered...
At that stage, yeah.
You've offered to walk her back home?
Yeah, if she was going to go home, if that was what she wanted to do, I would have been all too happy to walk her back home.
But there's a reason why Gable wanted to walk Warriena home that early. Warriena had drunk quite a bit and was starting to act a bit strange.
Yeah, I mean, at that stage, I noticed she was behaving a little bit quirky, and that's all I thought it was at first.
Warriena and Gable hadn't been drinking just the beer they'd bought, but moonshine vodka made in Gable's kitchen. By 1 a.m., Warriena declared herself psycho drunk, and yet Gable kept pouring glasses. Before long, things started heating up between the two, and not just in the fun way. At 1:35 a.m., Warriena started accusing Gable of stealing her phone and threatening him pretty aggressively.
I will destroy your jaw. It's not funny.
Warriena couldn't find her phone and was convinced Gable had hidden it somewhere as a joke. But no matter what Gable said, she had made her mind up. And about destroying his jaw, well, the 3-hour-long recording Gable took shows multiple instances of her hitting him.
She says, do you want me to destroy your jaw?
Yeah.
So, had she already hit you?
At that stage, it was kind of what I understood to be play fighting, but as you'll see throughout the night, it got worse and worse.
Gable ended up complaining about Warriena's behavior more and more throughout their night. I'm not sure whether she found it amusing, but it was getting out of hand. She kept hitting me, taunting me, throwing my stuff around, and trashing my apartment. Perhaps it would have been his word against poor Warriena's, but for whatever reason, there's a full recording of their very strange date.
Oh! I think that was actually a rock being thrown at me.
You caught one there, did you?
Yeah, close range too.
Warriena had found a dish full of decorative rocks, and she made it her mission to throw them at Gable. At this point, Gable wanted her to leave his apartment, but they were both a bit too drunk to see it through.
That's enough. That is more than enough. You've worn out your welcome.
At that point,
you've decided that's enough.
I've told her, you've worn out your welcome, and there's a point where I kind of paused for a minute and thought, what do I do? How do I sort this out? She can't be in my apartment any longer.
Around this time, Warriena can be heard panting and struggling for air. The prosecution would argue that Gable had pinned her to the floor with her face towards the carpet. This is when Gable delivered his horrifying line.
You're lucky I haven't chucked you off my balcony, you damn psycho little
Make of that what you will. Years later, Gable says this is just a horribly unfortunate choice of words, as he had no idea what would happen less than an hour later.
I didn't intend that as a threat. I intended it as a figure of speech to say, you're lucky I've been so tolerant with you.
At this point, Gable lifted Warriena up in the air and started carrying her to the nearest door. She tried to grab the metal clamp of a telescope, and Gable tells her to drop it. Warriena's reaction is downright chilling.
Who the do you think you are?
No!
Hmm?
No! No! No!
You're trying to kill me, huh?
No!
Why are you trying to hit me with that?
No!
Huh?
No! 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 No!
This bit of the recording sent shivers down many spines, with even Facebook groups discussing what exactly happened during Warriena's last terrifying moments. Scream does no justice to the sound Wright makes. Each no is a primal, stop right now roar that barrels up from her stomach and comes out ragged, edged, throaty. Gable had locked Warriena on his balcony. She was desperate to just go home.
But you've been...
Perhaps Gable was annoyed beyond self-control at that point, but why didn't he just kick Warriena out of his apartment?
Why didn't you just use the front door?
Because that's only a question that you can ask in hindsight when you have to desperately get someone away from you and separate the two of you and try and de-escalate an altercation. It doesn't come into the equation that that person is going to climb off a balcony and fall 14 floors to their death.
Those were indeed the terrifying moments Warriena lived before her untimely death. Scared that she was a prisoner on Gable's balcony, she tried to climb down to the balcony below and let herself out through the neighbor's apartment. She slipped and fell from the 14th floor and died immediately. Her last horrifying scream can be heard from Gable's phone. Her body was so shattered, it was found almost folded over on itself. Gable might not have thrown Warriena from his balcony, but his actions following her death raised more than a few eyebrows.
He didn't call for an ambulance. He certainly didn't call the police. His first action was to call his lawyer, but with no answer, he decided to get dressed and leave the building.
As he saw the emergency services reach the front of the building, Gable left through the underground car park. He then walks down to the city center and has a slice of pizza. Yeah, pizza.
By the time I ate, I had been wandering around the streets, confused, extremely drunk and in shock, and I needed to clear my head and sober up.
It's then that he called his dad.
Hello, Dad. I might have a bit of a situation.
A week later, the police charged Gable with the murder of Warriena Wright. They argued that although Gable did not push her from his balcony, Warriena was so afraid of him, she was practically forced to escape. What followed was a lengthy, tiresome trial where the jury simply couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. While Gable's words to Warriena and his actions following her death were more than creepy, there were a few other things to take into account. Warriena's blood alcohol reading was 3 times over the legal driving limit at the time of her death. Also, there were clear signs of Warriena attacking Gable on his body. And of course, there was the recording, although creepy. It was exactly the evidence Gable needed in order to be acquitted of murder.
If you had actually heard someone give that description, or if Mr. Tost had given evidence without that tape and explained what had occurred in that apartment for the hour and 46 minutes before,
would have been unbelievable.
It would have been unbelievable.
By late 2016, Gable was free, as the recording made it clear Warriena was severely drunk and Gable didn't make her jump. But Warriena's family is beyond devastated. Her mom, Beth, specifically asked the judge not to release Gable's recording to the public, but they did. And soon this created a media frenzy that left Beth and Reza even more hurt. I do not want to remember her like that. Gable's lawyer, Nick Dorr, was also surprised at the craze which stemmed from this case. I've acted for people who kids, I've acted for triple murderers, notorious files, but all of a sudden, this one particular case becomes the moral high ground. And even Warriena's dad, Warren, when he finally agreed to talk to journalists, said, "The media are blowing this case out of proportion. You look at something like Aleppo and 60 families are being killed there every day. Why is this up there?" Gable also complained about the media making him look like a cold-blooded monster who went to get pizza as soon as his date fell from his balcony. He says it's easy to handpick someone's worst social media posts and paint a horrible image around them. Sure, but he must take some responsibility for behaving like that with Warriena, right? You don't just lock someone on your balcony for being drunk.
A lot of things I could have changed about that night.
Such as?
Taking her home earlier, in hindsight. But you don't get hindsight when you've never experienced something like this in your entire life.
Gable remains a very debated character in Australia and New Zealand. While he didn't kill Warriena, their whole date was a very creepy one, and his behavior around women is definitely questionable. Warriena's dad, however, advises the police to find the right punishment for Gable. Meanwhile, Warriena's tragic story remains a cautionary tale for online dating users seeking quick, casual Peter Johansson, a psychologist who analyzed Warriena's case, said to override lust and just go through their Facebook page, hold a Skype date first, and plan an hour-long initial meeting. No one deserves to go through what Warriena did on her last night. All her family can do now is remember her as the bright, caring person she was, and seek closure in the fact that this story will inspire others to stay safe. And that is the truly tragic story of Warriena Wright. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Anna Solves. Hey, don't be shy, give this video a like and subscribe. And if you can take it, why not check out the other disturbing cases? Have a good night, stay safe, and take care of each other. It's scary out there.